We're going to talk about how do you go about acquiring a good name. But acquiring a good name is something that can last for a very, very short period of time if you're not careful. And so you have to go through your life maintaining that name. It's like maintenance on an automobile. That automobile is new and it's working in perfect order when you first get it, but over time you have to make sure you're always maintaining it so that it retains that idea of good workmanship. Retain is that idea. You retain it not just for yourself and to the longevity of your life, but a good name is actually something you ought to be able to pass down to your children and your children's children as well. That others should be able to react well to your children and your children's children because of the good name that you've retained throughout all those years. I know that when Angie first met me and she heard that I was a Caskey, she's like, okay, I've got to have that. No, it was not. There's a lot of our names. It's funny when you think about a person's name and the reputation that goes along with a name. A lot of people who know me have only known me from preaching. And so it's real easy to get the idea that my family has always been sort of that type of people when that's not the case. Others, when they hear that I'm a preacher, are shocked because of the name that's there. One time I was on my way home from work and they held me over late at work, and it was when I was in high school, so I needed to get home. I got to go to school the next day, and I'm trying to eat and drive at the same time. And a cop pulled me over. And when he pulled me over, he was obviously pulling me over because I was weaving and he thought I might be drinking. And so he shined the light in there and I told him what was going on, and he said, oh, okay. He said, well, let me see your license. I showed him my license. He said, Caskey, you any kin to Bobby and Ricky Caskey? I said, yeah, that's my dad and uncle. He said, huh, you sure you hadn't been drinking? And he scrutinized me a lot more because he had had run-ins with them when they were younger, and it carried over. We need to be the kind of people who understand a good name is important, because the name that we have now is the name Christian. We're named after the Son of God. And that name is higher than any son or daughter on this earth could ever be named by. That is an eternal name and one that carries great weight. When we talk about the ideas of a name, there's three words that come to mind. One is reputation. That's the overall quality or character as seen or judged by other people in general. In other words, your reputation is what other people see you and then they talk about you. And that could be either right or wrong because it's all based upon their perception of who they think you are. When we talk about a person's character, one of the definitions of character is this: a person marked by notable or conspicuous traits. In other words, that person is quite a character, isn't he? He stands out because of certain things. But more notably, one of the definitions of character is moral excellence and firmness. In other words, a person has a firm character. He has strong character. That means that he is firm in his beliefs and he is unwavering in those. Those are the types of things when it comes to our character, which builds up a third word, which is the word integrity. Integrity has the idea of firm adherence to a code of especially moral values. It's incorruptibility. It's the quality or state of being complete or undivided. When we talk about things that are integrated into one another, we talk about how it is that they fit together. When we talk about these three words and this idea of a good name, that's what we're talking about. How does our reputation and our character, how is it integrated together to form our integrity? It shouldn't be separate. We ought to the best of our ability, try to achieve having a reputation which is correct in regards to our character. Because we are the kinds of people who have integrity. We are unwavering. And we make all of these things fit together perfectly. I don't have a different character here than I have at work. I don't have a different character here than I do in my own home. That's what it means to have integrity. It permeates itself into every aspect and every area of our life. And if we are to have this good name that's being spoken of in the Scriptures, we must make sure that these are all integrated into one another correctly. Because if we do that, there's going to be occasions where even our enemies, those who hate us, aren't going to have anything evil to say about us. We're going to talk about that more tonight as we talk about our enemies and how we're to love them. But notice through the Scriptures some of the people that we can take note of. Hebrews 11 and verse 4 talks about Abel, and that how by faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, and through which he obtained witness that he was righteous. God testified of his gifts, and through it he being dead still speaks. Abel is still speaking to us today of what it means to be a righteous person, what it means to offer to God an acceptable sacrifice, because God was the one who commended it. God spoke to that and said, that is what I want. That is what I think is acceptable. That is how you are to be acting and behaving in your life. Acts 10 and verse 22, Cornelius the centurion, a just man, one who fears God, and notice this, he has a good reputation among all the nation of the Jews. Cornelius, a centurion, a Roman soldier. This person, not just any soldier, but somebody who has at least 100 others beneath him, since he's a centurion. That's where the name comes from. He had a good reputation, even among the Jews who hated the Romans, who saw them as an occupying force. Even the Jews looked at him and said that is a good man, and had a good reputation among them. And we see why from that passage. In Acts 16, verses 1 and 2, at Derbe and Lystra, there was a certain disciple that was there named Timothy. And we know about Timothy. And here's where we're first introduced to him. But he was a young man that the disciples in that area spoke highly of. So highly of him, and when Paul observed him, he observed it to be true and wanted this young man to accompany him on his journeys. And we know the rest of that story. But he was a man, even as a young man, he was able to have a reputation, a good name, to have integrity and character, one that Paul observed and used for the benefit of the Lord, even from that young age. Even with our Savior in Luke 2 and verse 52, it mentions that Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. Over and over and over again, there's account after an account after an account of these individuals who have a good name, that were well spoken of and had a good report. And there's a lot of value to that. If you start forming that type of reputation while you're young, you have to understand that it's a valuable thing. It is more to be desired, it says in Proverbs 22 and verse 1, that we'll look at more closely in a moment. But in Proverbs 22 and verse 1, it says that this good name is something that ought to be sought after more than riches, because it is great value that's attached to that. In Ecclesiastes 7 and verse 1, it talks about that we are to be having this good name and how it's a desirable thing, and that even the day of your death can be better than the day of your birth because of this good name that you have. In Song of Solomon, we don't use Song of Solomon very often, but notice in Song of Solomon, the first chapter in verse 3, I thought this was a really good comparison of what we're talking about when it comes to this good name. Song of Solomon 1, verse 3. The Shulamite is speaking and says, because of the fragrance of your good ointments, your name is ointment poured forth. Therefore the virgins love you. It's talking about this person's name, the beloved's name, is like this ointment, this precious perfume. But we know that how it is, what she's basically saying is you smell good. But we know that with a perfume or something like that, yes, when it enters the room, you can smell it. When you get close to a person, you can smell it. But it only lasts for a short period of time. But a person's name, and that's what she compares it to, but a person's name is something that lasts forever, that when you hear that name, there's beauty, there's attraction that is there when you hear the name of this other person. That's what we're looking for. That's the value that's attached to it. And the reason that it's value is because it does indeed give you a sense of direction. In Proverbs 10, or Proverbs 11 rather, we're going to be looking at several Proverbs this morning. Proverbs 11 and verse 3. Notice here the wise man says in Proverbs 11 and verse 3, that the integrity of the upright will guide them, and the perversity of the unfaithful will destroy them. It gives you a sense of direction because you know what your name represents. And so you're not going to be doing anything as you go about your day-to-day activities, or in whatever company you may have. You're not going to do anything that's going to jeopardize that. Because I am a whatever your name was, your parents expected you to act a certain way. You don't do that because you're a Caskey. You don't do that because you're whatever your last name was. And so you don't do that because of that name that's there, but because you are a Christian, even more so. Because I am a Christian, it gives me a sense of direction. I know how I'm supposed to behave tomorrow. I know how I'm to treat my enemies, as we're going to look at tonight. I know how I'm to be as a husband, or a person should be as a wife. I know how to conduct myself because of the name that I have. It gives me that sense of direction. Also, it's something that protects us. In Proverbs 10 and verse 9, he who walks with integrity walks securely, but he who perverts his ways will become known. In Proverbs 13, verses 5 and 6, it says that a righteous man hates lying, but a wicked man is loathsome and comes to shame. Righteousness guards him whose way is blameless, but wickedness overthrows the sinner. My name goes places that I may never go, but a name can protect me. If I go about establishing a good name, a name that's known for firmness in being righteous, walking with integrity, never telling lies and speaking the truth, following through on the things that I'm going to say I do, then even if I never go somewhere, somebody may speak ill of me, and somebody who knows my name will say, that doesn't sound like him. There are things that somebody may say about you. Well, I heard that this brother was at a ball game the other day, and he did this and that, and it just was shocking. And we ought to be able to say, that doesn't sound like him. And not believe that thing until it is verified. That's what it means to be protected by a name. And that's the way that God expects for us to have protection attached to it. This name also means that you're trustworthy. And I'll let you look up these on your own, but there's several examples of things such as this. In Exodus 18, you have Moses who's being told it's too much for him to judge the people on his own. And so there's others that are going to help him in judging the people. But these people are to be well reported of. They're supposed to have a good name attached to them. In Nehemiah chapter 7, Hananiah is one who is selected to oversee the citadel when Nehemiah leaves for a time. And the reason that he is able to do that is because it says that he is one who feared God more than others. He had a good report attached to his name. In other places, such as in Acts chapter 6, we have the example of those 7 men who are overseeing the issue with the widows being neglected in the daily distribution. But it says that these men are to be well reported of. These are men of renown, people that you know that are trustworthy. When you have a good name, when you have a name that has a good reputation, a name that is known for character and integrity, people can trust you more readily. Well, I know who you are. I know your family's name. I've known of people, and this happens especially in smaller towns, that they won't sell land to anybody outside the family. And if they sell land outside the family to somebody, they want to know for sure that your family has a good name before they'll sell that land to you, because they don't want to be neighbors with somebody who has a bad name. And that will follow you for a long period of time. It means you can be trusted with certain things, and certainly as a Christian it ought to be the case. Proverbs 22 and verse 1 is an interesting passage, and it's always the one that we go to when we talk about this idea of a good name, because it says in Proverbs 22 and verse 1 that a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, loving favor rather than silver and gold. And so what I want to do is to think about this for just a moment, and it's really not a difficult formula. How do you get a good name? In that passage it says it's something that ought to be sought after, desired, longed for, more than great riches. So let's use that idea of great riches then. He uses great riches because, like it is in many of the Proverbs, that's something that everybody understands. That if you want great riches, you know how that you can come by great riches, generally speaking. Use those same principles when it comes to having a good name. First, you know that if you're going to have great riches, or you want great riches, you're going to have to work for them. In Proverbs 14 and verse 23, Proverbs 14 verse 23 says that in all labor there is profit, but idle chatter leads only to poverty. In Proverbs 20 and verse 6, it says that most men will proclaim his own goodness, but who can find a faithful man? In other words, in both of these passages, you see a very similar thing. is that if you want to be rich, don't talk about the things that you can do. Don't talk about all the work you're good at. Don't talk about all the labor that you would be skilled in. Idle chatter doesn't lead anywhere. If you want to make money, you're going to have to work. Period. That's the way that you get it. Same way with integrity and character. Don't tell me about how good you are. Don't talk about how you're a person of character. Don't talk about, as it is for a couple of decades now at least, about how you should be respected. Because you telling me you need to be respected does not get respect. When you act like a respectful person, that's when you get respect. Nobody deserves respect until it's earned. No one deserves to be believed until they're known for telling the truth. We are to be those kinds of people that earn what it is that we're known by. Jesus in Matthew chapter 7 talks about that a tree is known by its fruit, and that if you are constantly being disrespected by people who are respectable people, it's probably because you're acting very disrespectfully. And that's a harsh reality, but a tree is known by its fruit. As Christians, we are to be, as much as we can, kind, compassionate, loving, patient, long-suffering, all these things with the world. And we may not get most of them to appreciate that. But as much as depends on us, let's have the reputation that we treat people with meekness, humility, respect, and honor, so that we can have a good reputation. But you have to work for it. It has to be work that is meaningful. There's a lot of people today who want to work in certain areas and they want to be paid for it. Well, there's a lot of people who don't want to pay for it. It's like back years ago, people used to go out and have to cut ice and then bring those blocks of ice to a person's door. I'm not going to pay someone to cut ice today and bring it to my door, because I've got a refrigerator that I can stick my cup into and the ice falls out of it. Right? There's a lot of times where as Christians we forget that we're not just going through the motions of constantly coming to church and that somehow is going to give us a good name. No. The work that you do as a Christian, the work that you do trying to maintain and retain the name of Christian, means it needs to be profitable work. In other words, when we come together and some of the things that we do, there's a lot of things that we can contribute. Ephesians 4 talks about how the church grows because of what each member provides for the body. That's what we're supposed to be doing. When we go into the world, people don't have a good perception of Christians today because a lot of Christians don't do the things that they say they actually believe in. But we're supposed to be different than that. And so we're supposed to be doing profitable work in the community and in the world. Proverbs 28 and verse 19 says this: "He who tills his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows frivolity will have poverty enough." Proverbs 3, verses 1 through 4. Notice at the beginning of this, just before he talks about trusting in the Lord, he says in verses 1 through 4, "My son, do not forget my law, but let your heart keep my commands. For length of days and long life and peace they will add to you. Let not mercy and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. And so find favor and high esteem in the sight of God and man." But notice that what he's talking about is that you do these things like exercise mercy and truth before other people. These are the things that will give you favor. God will speak well of it, and men will as well. This will give you a good name. In Matthew 5 and verse 16, we have the famous passage where Jesus talks to us about being lights in this world, and that you're not to be someone who's hidden, but to be seen. But the reason that you do your good works is that they may glorify your God when they see them. Make it profitable. That's what good work and working for a good name is all about. Just like it is with money, that once you've worked for it, you've done some meaningful, some profitable work, you can't now take that money that you've made and just keep squandering it, just keep spending it frivolously. It's supposed to be used correctly. Proverbs 13, verse 22. Proverbs 13, verse 22 says, "A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous." In Acts 15, there's an example of someone who almost squandered, it seems, a good name. In Acts 15, you have Paul and Barnabas, after they've come back from some of their missionary journeys. They've dealt with a dispute about circumcision and the Gentiles having to be circumcised. And then they're going to go back out and they're going to start preaching again. And Paul and Barnabas, who have been such a great team together, get into this argument about John Mark, because John Mark decided to leave them earlier and not continue with them. And Paul didn't want him to go with them. Didn't think it was right for him, since he had left before, to go with them on this journey, because he may do the same thing again. Barnabas, who's related to John Mark, seems to say, no, that's not the case. He can be trusted. And so he takes him and goes in one direction, and Paul goes in another. It's a great and wonderful thing that is not the last time that we hear about John Mark. But later in life, Paul actually asked for John Mark, because he's profitable to me. A good name can be wasted. There's so many passages, such as 1 Corinthians 15:33 and also Psalm 1 and others, that talk about the danger of keeping bad company. You run with dogs, you get fleas. You've heard that expression. You run with bad people, you carry their name. Many states, I believe Texas is one of them, that if you are the one who's driving the car of someone who goes and robs a bank, you're charged with robbing the bank also. And the reason being is because you are in evil company and you're participating with them in the things that they did. You're not going to have a good name running with people who are sinners and doing those things that are contrary to the Lord's will. That's why the Bible talks about avoiding them and not keeping company with them. It's because of that very reason. And just like it is with money as well, you don't invest one time or from one paycheck and expect that to be enough for you to retire on. That in the financial word, they say it's not timing the market, it's time in the market. In other words, you always keep investing, and you invest and you invest and you invest, and you leave it in there for a long period of time. Our name is that same way, is that you can start out, because most of us started out this way. We came forward, we confessed that we believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and we were baptized for the forgiveness of our sins. We arose from the waters of baptism, and we were sinless. We were as newborn babes, not a sin that could be held against us. But that name can be tarnished very quickly, as we saw. You have to keep investing in that name. You have to keep spending time on that name. You have to keep working on that name. You have to bear the consequences of that name. And when there's good times and when there's bad times, you have to ride that roller coaster, and you have to keep on keeping on investing in that name. 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 7 is one of the passages that we have that's qualifications of elders. And in that you see that they're supposed to have a good reputation even among those who are outside. But it also says in those qualifications that they're not to be a novice, someone who is new in these things. That this is a person who's supposed to be, as it says in verse 2, that he must be blameless. He's a husband of one wife. He's temperate. He's sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach. All these things that you see are things that are gained and accomplished over a long period of time. Now, one of the problems that I think sometimes we have in the church is this, is that if you're not an elder or not going to be an elder, it's probably the case that you look at these passages and say, well, that doesn't have anything to do with me then. That this passage of Scripture was only written for those who are elders. And I don't think we do the Scriptures the right, we don't treat them the right way when we do such a thing. These things that it talks about here are things that Christians are supposed to be anyway. But what you're talking about with an elder is someone who desires that office because over a lifetime he has shown himself to be consistent in doing this. He is working at his patience. He is working at his ability to teach. He is working at being a husband. He is working at being a father. And he has shown himself to be effective in these areas, that even among the outsiders he has a good reputation because he has worked at it. That's the point. And that's what we're supposed to be doing with our name as Christians. In Psalm 15, the 15th Psalm, we can see some of this consistency as well. Psalm 15. Lord, who may abide in your tabernacle? Who may dwell in your holy hill? And then he answers, he who walks uprightly and works righteousness and speaks the truth in his heart. He who does not backbite with his tongue, nor does evil to his neighbor, nor does he take up a reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but he honors those who fear the Lord. He who swears to his own hurt and does not change. He who does not put out his money at usury, nor does he take a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things shall never be moved. And you can tell from that passage, it's not talking about one time. Well, that one time, God, I didn't lie about my neighbor. That one time, God, remember that one time that I could have said something bad, and I didn't do it that one time. Now, we understand from that passage what he's talking about, that this is the characteristic of this person's life. He has integrity. He's consistent in his life. And he's constantly investing in that person who God wants him to be. In Galatians chapter 6, I think it becomes even more evident of this fact. Galatians 6, and starting at verse 1. Here Paul says, "Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual." How are you going to tell someone who is spiritual? That's not a one-time deal. And that's not just because a person has been named a Christian. "You who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one examine his own work, and then he will have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. For each one shall bear his own load." So it presents a picture of this idea that you are responsible for taking care of the burdens that you have. However, I'm responsible for helping you carry those burdens. It is laid upon your shoulder, but my duty is to help you with it. You can't point to me and say, it's your obligation to do this for me. No, it's your obligation to do it. It's my obligation to help you in doing that. And along the way, that's how we both learn patience, gentleness, meekness, forgiveness, long-suffering. Patience is how we learn all these things. Let him who is taught in the word share in all good things with him who teaches it. Don't be deceived. God's not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. For he who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption. But he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. And notice this in verse 9. "And let us not grow weary while doing good. For in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith." And so over and over again, this idea of continuance, of constantly working on that name that I've been given. Is it the name that I'm always wanting someone else to carry my load for me? Or do I have the kind of name that I've arrived to a position in my life where now I can help you carry the load that you have? Because that's what we're working toward. You reap what you sow. If you will work on service, if you'll work on care, compassion for others, if you'll work on those traits that we saw in the qualifications of elders and deacons, or in Titus 2 with the older men and younger, if you'll work on those traits, brethren, you will reap what you have sown. And you will have that good name that is better than the name of a son. Don't let the foreigner think, as we saw from Isaiah, that God has cut me off from the people. Don't let the eunuch say that I'm unfruitful, I'm a barren tree, I'm a dried out tree. Don't say that, because God says, I'm going to give you a name that is better than the name son or daughter. I'm going to give you an everlasting name. And that's the name that we're seeking after. So the question I'm going to leave with you is this one. What investments have you made toward that name? I pray that you're doing well in that. And I know many of you are. But if it's something that you're struggling with, if it's something that you don't know where to start or what you need to do to change, we want to help you in that. If there's something that we can do this morning, whether you want to be baptized for the remission of your sins, or whether you need the prayers of the congregation, or if you need to sit down and just have a study every now and then with somebody, whatever that need will be, please let us know as together we stand and sing.